Welcome to Tulsa Talks, presented by Tulsa Regional Chamber. I'm your host, Tim Landis. My guest on this episode has been providing the soundtrack for fun Sunday nights at the Colony for a decade. He's also played just about every stage in Tulsa during his nearly 30-year career. If there was a Mount Rushmore for modern Tulsa musicians, Paul Benjamin's sunglass smiling face would be there representing the new Tulsa sound. He has toured all over the U.S. and in Europe, and he's played many music festivals, including representing our city and state's music scene numerous times at South by Southwest. Since 2010, he has been featured on multiple Horton Records releases, including a few studio albums. He also appears on the 2020 compilation Back to Paradise, a Tulsa tribute to Okie music, where he covers J.J. Kell, Don White, Steve Pryor, and Teagarden and Van Winkle. Of course, we had to talk about the making of this historic record. Paul learned from legendary guitarist Junior Brown and has worked with Steve Earle, Jamie Johnson, George Porter Jr. of the Meters, John Densmore of the Doors, Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, Gary Busey, and many more. He also had an appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon as a sideman for the Secret Sisters, which he talks about later in this episode. When he's not playing live music, he's been helping others learn how to play guitar for 25 years as an instructor at Guitar House of Tulsa. We featured a great article on the business earlier this year that is linked in the show notes. We discuss his musical origins, his long career in music, and what has kept Paul in Tulsa all this time. We talk about the current state of the music scene and what he's got in the works. Psst, there's a new album on the way. Following our conversation, you can hear his song, Sneaker, so stick around for that. Paul is a really cool dude and a heck of a musician. I'm so happy we finally got the chance to sit down and talk. A reminder, you can always find weekly music listings every Monday at tulsapeople.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast channel if you haven't already, so you can hear all of our featured conversations and our twice-monthly mini-episodes of About Town. Okay, let's get this going. This is Tulsa Talks with Paul Benjamin. Welcome to Tulsa Talks, Paul. I'm so excited to finally sit down and have a chat with you.
Yeah, it took me a bit to find the building for strange reasons, but I'm glad to be on the show. I'm glad to finally get it together.
So you recently celebrated 1 decade of Sunday night shows at the Colony, and I had previously said, it might have been on the Brian Horton podcast when we had him on here, but on one of them I said, you cannot be a true Tulsan until you've seen Paul Benjamin play at the Colony. And so here we are, a decade into it. People have had plenty of opportunities to see you play there. How does it feel for you to know that it's been a decade long of playing shows there?
Yeah, it feels like no time has passed, really, because it still feels like I'm on like week number 5 of the show. And I think a reason for that is because I'm always excited to do the show. And the premise of it is it's me and a Tulsa backing band, a drummer and a bass player. They switch out musicians from time to time, but it's that, and we're playing Tulsa tunes, tunes I've written, a couple of things from other Tulsa songwriters like Cody Clinton, Bo Roberson, and some J.J. Cale tunes, but mostly material I write. And then every week we have a different special guest. And it started out as being local area Tulsa musicians, and then it branched out into touring musicians such as Ian Moore, Marcus King, Jackie Vinson, who've gone on to have really hot careers. And it's been really, really cool to have them come in and sit in. There's absolutely no plan for them every week. They get to play, solos and lead guitar over the tunes. They get to really stretch out. So it's exciting for them, too. I let them stretch out as long as they want and say whatever they want over the song, as it's going. And so it always makes it for a unique experience every week that people can come back to and expect something exciting and different. So,
how long have you been playing in the Tulsa music scene now?
Oh, wow. There's a question. Yeah. Boy, a young, squeaky, behind the ears, not even 21-year-old version of myself was playing at Eclipse back in the early 90s. That's how far back I go. So it's been interesting. I was in a band out of Tahlequah at the time called Greenwater Mirror. And before that, I'd played like the state fairs and things, the Crystals Cabaret Theater down at the state fair and things. So I've had some Tulsa appearances before that. I was raised in a small town, Inola, outside of Tulsa, but I've lived in Tulsa for the past 25 years. And yeah, it's been an odyssey. It's been an odyssey.
Yeah, Inola. Well, Rogers County. I'm from Claremore originally.
Oh, okay.
So not that far away from there. And, of course, not that far away from here in Tulsa. But, yeah, that's interesting. So you're from Inola. Cody Clinton's from the Oologah area. So,
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you rule boys. So
a lot of musicians, I think, are from kind of around the more rural areas because we definitely had to adopt early on a very DIY aesthetic to what we did. There was this, where are we going to play? Well, we'll just find this garage to play in or something like that. And we pieced together things ourselves. So I think a lot of my show planning skills that I developed over the years came from that, starting with almost, pretty much nothing and just having to figure things out as you go. And I've learned so much about being a Tulsa musician over the years from almost kind of being, taking it from an outsider's perspective and seeking to understand first before being understood.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, my dad, when he lived here, he lives in South Texas where he's from now, but when he lived here in the 90s, so he was in a blues band called The Missing Link out of Claremore, and they would play all over, and they played like Joey's. Like I was too young to go, but when Joey's was around, it was a club here in town. He played Tulsa Blues Fest all the time. Those early days of Juneteenth for me when I would go. So I know a little bit about the music scene of the 90s, but it was a little bit before my time. So I find it interesting that you were jamming around town during that same period.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. I started there, and then I was in a band that was fairly popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, Rewake.
Okay.
And we picked up a lot of Tulsa Spot Awards back when they had the Spot Awards and things. And then I started Paul Benjamin Band roughly around 2007. I started working out on my own tunes. Before then, I was mainly just a guitar player, like a side man. And so I would side with Steve Liddell and musicians around the area. Mm-hmm.
What got you into music originally?
It was something that I always wanted to do, ever since just a kid growing up around radio. And when I grew up on a small 10-acre farm just outside, right off of Highway 412 before 412 was even completed. And it was just me and a record player that I'd been gifted, and some hand-me-down records. And I was the first kid out of three. So a lot of times it'd be like me out there out in the country just listening to records. And I had a Sly and Family Stone record. And that's really what kind of set me on the path. I was like, oh, yeah, I want to do this. And I had a plastic guitar.
Sly and the Family Stone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty interesting. So there's this kid listening to funk music. Yeah, listening to the Godfather, one of the Godfathers of funk, out there, in rural Inola, Oklahoma. So exactly. So if you've ever been to a show and you go, well, that's pretty weird. Well, this is how this happened. This is the genesis of all the strange things that you hear in my show. That's pretty much the beginning of it. And then to add to that, I'd taken lessons from a lady who was at the First Baptist Church in Inola. Really, really sweet lady. She wasn't into rock and roll. She still thought it was the devil's music. But her husband was the head of the music department at Rogers State College at the time. And he said, well, I think I got this guy that might be able to show him some rock and roll things. So for a year and a half, I ended up taking from Junior Brown. Junior Brown lived here in town before, he had hit it big and things. And so Junior saw a very impressionable young mind. I was 13 at the time, and he just got in there and just warped it for good with different ideas.
How cool is it, though, now looking back, that you could say I was taught by Junior Brown?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things he taught me was really, I still listen to this day, and I'm still working on. And he got me into Jimi Hendrix, and he got me into so many cool things. And he showed me, really, the most important thing is he showed me, because you can mix the country and the psychedelic rock and the heavy rock and the whatever, and you can put it all really into one song or one show and try to get it all done that way, and that really started this eclecticism that followed me through my years as a music student at universities. I went to NEO in Miami for a while, then was an NSU student for a while, and briefly a TCC student. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you catch on to the Tulsa sound, the original, the J.J. Kells, the Leon Russells? When did you learn about them?
Yeah, I started picking it up a little bit on the side into my late 20s, but it really wasn't until I turned about 30 and I got a hold of my first J.J. Kell record. And that was just revolutionary for me, because here was a guy presenting another side of pretty much what we've been talking about, mixing country, mixing rock, this whole Tulsa thing that has always kind of been this little hidden river going through here where all kinds of styles of music meet. And people all over the world still talk about that when they find out that I'm from Tulsa. They're like, well, yeah, it's a place where, country and rock and it all just kind of blends together, and you have a group of musicians that can do it all. And at the time, it was J.J. Cale's Troubadour. That was the first record I started with. And I saw the way he was mixing country and funk and rock all together. I saw this direct correlation between that and one of my favorite records at the time, which was Beck's Odelay.
Yeah.
If you listen to both records, you almost feel like Beck had to know about that album and what JJ was up to in order for him to, get the impetus for what was going to be that Odelay record that all those great songs came off of.
What inspired you to become a singer? Because, you said you started out as the sideman, guitarist in the band and everything, but you finally move in front of the microphone at some point. So what gave you the confidence or the motivation to become the front man?
It was kind of a leading off bass. I always wanted to start my own projects, and, when you're in your 20s, bands get together and they break up for all kinds of crazy, out of control. Everybody's young, they're in the club, there's this and that, and there's this and that. And so there's all the rock and roll stories that you've ever heard of, ranging from alcohol, drinking, drugs, suicide, the whole thing. You experience that being in bands in the 20s. So, I eventually just wanted to kind of just be in control of my own project. And my idea, when I heard the J.J. Cale record, he was the first guy that came along, one of the very few guys that was coming along, and he wasn't singing like a rock star. He was kind of keeping it backing in, and he kept it in a range that I could sing in. And I thought, well, this is something I can do. I can use this as a vehicle just to get to the next guitar solo. That's all I'm really trying to do. Mm-hmm. That's how that started. So I started with a handful of tunes that I kind of wrote around that idea. And I did my first performance as a solo artist. And it was a friend that asked me to do an opener for another acoustic act in Red Oak, Texas. And I thought, well, that's a safe bet. If I bomb in Red Oak, nobody's going to know, And the show went well enough that I kept going. Yeah.
There's probably somebody out there that you've toured come through the area and they were like, I saw that kid back in Red Oak and he was awful.
Who knows? Yeah, he was terrible. Yeah, it wasn't, I started off with like a tune I wrote. I think I did a J.J. Cale tune out there, and I did a Frank Black song, because I've always really been into the Pixies, and I've always also had, a really, really deep early 90s alternative kind of background to go along with everything else with my Oklahoma experience.
Yeah.
So a lot of those bands from back in there, the seminal early 90s bands that really eventually hit it pretty big, the Nirvanas, the Soundgardens, and all that. And then some of the more off the road stuff like Concrete Blonde and the Pixies and what have you. So there's always that I'm returning to, and pulling really more artistic ideas versus just using your van to be a platform to show off chops and things, and ways to dial things in an artistic way. It's still a very important thing to me, and things I try to seek out when I do videos and things, and people always ask about the shades and
yeah, right, yeah, I know the sunglasses.
Yeah.
Tulsa Talks listeners, we love Tulsa, and we know you do too. So does the Tulsa Regional Chamber. You might not realize it, but the Chamber is more than 100 years old, which more than makes it a Tulsa institution. They represent 2,000 member organizations and more than 175,000 area workers. As a business-driven leadership organization, their goal is to improve the quality of community life through the development of regional economic prosperity. What does that mean? It means their staff of 50 works hard every single day to attract, retain, and expand great businesses. They work to increase educational access and workforce skill levels. They advocate on behalf of their members at both the state and federal levels. They champion efforts to make our community more inviting and livable. And they promote our region as a vibrant tourist destination. To learn more about all that the Chamber does and to become a member, visit tulsachamber.com. Yeah, you've kept this the same like branding for a while now. The sunglasses, the long hair, the beard, like
it started pretty practical from a practical standpoint of just, you were playing in clubs, and if you're playing in clubs, the ceilings are usually pretty low. And so that means the stage lights are directly in your eyes.
Yeah.
You don't have the big light show where it's all shining. They're down and you're in front. And most people don't know because they say, well, you didn't see me at the show last week. Well, how come you don't remember me? Well, that's because you can't really see more than 3 feet in front of your face if you're on like a small club stage. Those lights are just directly in your eyes. So I was always kind of looking up and often to the distance. So the shades was a good place to start out as far as
Yeah, that makes
it's
sense.
like that. And Frank Black had always wore shades. Rick Ocasek had always wore shades, and J.J. Cale had always wore shades. So I saw this kind of connection that let's break up this white guy's face a little bit and give it a little bit of something to
Yeah. So how many guitars do you own?
I probably own roughly about 20. Something like that.
Okay.
It's not as out of control of a collection as some, and they're not all like the high-priced instruments that you might suspect. I've got a few, really nice guitars, a handful of those, and then the rest are for special things that I would get into, as a music student and as a music director, and then eventually a studio musician and things like that. I've had to, and teaching guitar especially, I would teach guitar and people would ask about like a nylon classical piece or a bluegrass, piece or something like that. So I'm like, well, shoot, now I need a steel string guitar for bluegrass. I'm in college, I'm learning this classical thing, so I better get a nylon string. And so everything I have serves a different kind of purpose. It's a different area for guitar, an electric 12 string, you know, and the different types of solid body guitars, the Telecaster, and then I have one really good Stratocaster, and then one I tour with, and then so it's a very utilitarian approach, but I do have a closet of roughly about 20 cases, and they're all just different oddball things. There was a time I got picked up to direct a band in Dallas. We were playing the Verizon, and we were backing up B.J. Thomas, and we were doing one of his hits that happened to use that guitar sitar thing. And I was talking to my friend Drew, who owns Guitar House of Tulsa, and he happened to be at a guitar show, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I saw one of those. I just picked it up, in case you wanted to pick it up." And he found one for me, and I got it, and so now I have one that makes those sitar, that mid '60s. And when B.J. Thomas got on stage, he was knocked out that the backing band had actually found one of those guitars and used it on his hit. So, and I played the solo exactly the way. The way it was recorded. It was really cool.
Yeah. And the cool thing about guitars is once you buy one, they're good forever. I mean, you have to change strings and all that.
Right.
But it's not like buying electronic equipment where like an iPhone or something where it ages out. After a certain amount of time, you've got to get the new upgrade. I mean, you can buy a Fender from 1950s, 1960s and jam on it, and it sounds like it just came out of the store if you've got it set up right. It's...
Yeah, that's the thing, and that's the thing that always, irks me about like the computer, we're stuck in with the computer world and the digital recording equipment is you buy something and then 10 years it's pretty much obsolete. Something else has come along in a new operating system. But guitars, electric guitars, we're still using the same interfaces, the same type of chord that they were using in 1935. The same, so you can get a guitar from, one of the very first electrics or one of the very early Fenders from the 50s, and the same quarter-inch style plug will move to whatever amplifiers they're making now for guitar. That's what I think is amazing. You're right.
Yeah. And you spend your days working at Guitar House of Tulsa, right? Or working with them?
I only give lessons there.
Right, but yeah, giving lessons.
It's been something, I've done anywhere from like 50 a week to right now, pandemic, I'm giving some at home FaceTime, and then we've just been doing some in-person lessons and starting that again. But I've been through the store. Bob Long eventually, he originally owned the store from 1976 on. I climbed on somewhere in the late 90s. So there's been 3 ownerships total for Guitar House, and every person that's bought the store has had to inherit me. I've been the guy in the back like, well, I don't know if they told you, but I'm kind of back here, and you gotta, I was part of the deal. Sorry,
when Drew bought it 6 years
ago.
That
wasn't what you were looking to get into.
Who's the gremlin in the back there?
They probably didn't tell you about me, but now you're stuck. Yeah.
The question is, did you lower or increase the value of the business?
Yeah. That's still up to conjecture, depending on who you talk to. So.
And that probably helps with you buying guitars and not buying them, because while you're there, you can pick up, play with one, and maybe not have to.
Yeah, it's most of my guitar collection is these just. If you think about, I've taught there for 25 years, so just things coming in over the counter, there's been deals that I just could not pass up. And, my guitar and amp collection has grown that way, yeah.
Now, I'm assuming that over the 25 years, some of those students were young, probably, and they're kids before even teenage years, who have now grown up. So what is it like seeing your pupils turn into musicians? I'm assuming you didn't run them all off away from music. They all continued playing.
It's really interesting, over the years, really, probably the most visible student that I've had was Cooper Waugh. He started taking from me, I think, roughly about the time he was 14, and then to the time he was 19. So we had a long, really good relationship. And you can see him playing really amazing honky-tonk guitar with Jacob Tovar and his band, As time has gone on, it's become more and more difficult to choose music as your occupation. So it's one of those things. A lot of times I have students that are really, really good, but if they decide to go get their finance degree, I'm like, yeah, do that. More power to you.
Right?
I used to be selling a lot of CDs. Spotify pretty much demonetized the industry. So go ahead and get that finance degree or the RN or the doctor thing or whatever else you want to tack on to picking guitar. So,
but the music scene here is pretty incredible. For the size of the city we have, where we're located and everything. I mean, Tulsa music, the music scene has been highlighted recently by Rolling Stone. I mean, you go back to songs by Huey Lewis, and he's talking about coming through Tulsa and how much it meant to him, throughout his career, everything. But when you look at Tulsa and the music scene, I mean, how much does that mean to you to be a part of that?
Yeah, it's very special. It's very special. The cool thing is this kind of handing down that, once I started picking up on, the J.J. Cale thing, or really, a pivotal moment in my career was the first time I saw Steve Pryor play a show. That really was, what I learned could be done with the Fender Stratocaster guitar. He was doing things that I'd never seen a guitar player anywhere else go. And I was in a progress where I was going to go back to finish my bachelor's degree in music, and then I go down to Arnie's and I see Steve Pryor, and I go, well, you can either finish your bachelor's degree and be a band director, or you can just follow this guy around and learn what you can off of him. So I ended up dropping out the second time and following Steve around, and he was kind enough to really let me learn firsthand. He asked me to do shows with them, and I played with them from about 2009 to 2016, and this kind of thing. When I did there's a real tendency, especially too, if you're part of this old guard, to be like, I don't know what's going on with these kids or something like that. But when I cut that tune in the church studio, them Tulsa boys, Rockin' Jimmy Byfield, who is one of the most biggest Tulsa music legends, the way he played music pretty much defined what the Tulsa sound was between him and J.J. Cale and Leon, and he's not as talked about as some others, but Eric Clapton has covered his tunes and things like that. One day I'm at Guitar House and I'm just walking through there, and this guy is like, "Hey, you Paul Benjamin?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You doing it right? You doing it right?" It was Rockin' Jimmy Byfield, and he was pretty impressed that I'd went and written that tune. So we became friends after that. And then Don White too. I played with Don White on his gigs, and just to hear the stories from those guys.
Right.
And just try to take that, and play it forward and figure out, what the next thing is going to be.
Yeah. So last year you were involved in the Back to Paradise tribute album. Speaking of Steve Pryor and Don White, on the album you covered both Don White's Hell of a Deal and you covered Steve Pryor's Misery Kicking In. Mm-hmm. So, and then a couple of J.J. Cale songs, a T. Garden and Van Winkle song. What did it mean to you to be able to record those covers of those Tulsa music legends?
It was really, really cool, and something deep really happened there. That project was the brainchild of Brian Horton and Jesse Aycock, who are deep, deep, deep record LP, vinyl heads, deep crate diggers, as we call them, And they'd come up with the idea, and Jesse had been out to see Rick Heskey's renovations of Leon's Lake House that he had out at Disney, Oklahoma, by Grand Lake. And it was ready to go. He had put it and restored it back to pretty much really how nice it was when Leon had it in there. It didn't have any recording equipment in there. It had everything but the recording equipment. So we had Jason Weinheimer, who had a studio out of Little Rock, who's done a lot of recording with us and recorded my last couple of albums, bring in the equipment, and then over a 4-day period we cut 17 tunes out there. And the tunes I recorded, I was already playing them on the reg. So that was pretty cool, that I'd done a J.J. Cale tribute before, and that's where the I'll Make Love to You Anytime came, and my first, the changes I made to that tune. And same with the Don White tune. I'd picked up that tune and decided to learn it for a gig. And then Steve Pryor, the Steve Pryor tributes that I've done after Steve passed on. So it was all stuff that was just kind of under my arm. I was able just to go in there with those guys and knock it out. And it was a really special experience to stay out there on that property and then, record every day. And yeah, it was a musician's dream.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I was like, that was one of those moments I wish I could have been a fly on the wall to just watch the process happen with all you musicians in the room playing all of these classic hits, or songs from these Tulsa icons. It
felt like Leon was kind of helping us through it. You could tell the way he engineered that building it was one of the few studios that I think he engineered for a large ensemble or a big band. So you go in there, and there's actually 2 doors on either side of the control room, which sits in the middle, and this big piece of glass that looks like an airport, control tower. That's what it looked like. And from inside there, you could fit roughly 20 people just hanging out and being behind the soundboard. And you could see all areas into this very large room. So what that amounted to is we would be working on a tune and we'd be cutting guitar parts. Well, we'd be in this one side of the building cutting guitar parts, and drums could be setting up for the whole next thing, and it was far enough apart that it wouldn't interfere or bleed into the mics or make sounds.
Oh, wow.
So as soon as we were done, we would stop, and then just control would go over to them, and they would cut their part, and then this would go back and forth, and that's how we were able to keep up such a huge song count. We put in 10-hour days pretty effortlessly, out there.
Man. So where do you record here in town?
I record a lot of stuff, a lot of takes out of my house. Yeah, on some stuff. The new record I'm working on, is out at Sonic Ranch Studio, which is where Broncho recorded their last album, and a good relationship formed between the owner of Sonic Ranch and Nathan Price, who plays drums for Broncho, and he also engineers and produces at the same time. Okay. So I went out in July, and we started the process of recording some stuff out there, and then it'll be interesting to see what happens when the new church studio opens up and those renovations start hitting the street.
That'll be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Tulsa Talks listeners, if you own a business, this is for you. The Tulsa Regional Chamber wants to be your partner in prosperity. With a membership in the Tulsa Regional Chamber, you will be connected to a growing network of 2,000 business owners throughout Northeast Oklahoma. Your company will join the largest business-to-business community in the Tulsa area. At more than 100 chamber events a year, your company can build relationships with potential clients, promote your brand, and give back to the community we all love. Through the chamber, you can connect to Visit Tulsa, the Tulsa Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as the Tulsa Sports Commission and their programs and events. Whether you are interested in legislative advocacy efforts, becoming a member of Tulsa's Young Professionals, or supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts through Mosaic, membership in the Tulsa Regional Chamber will help you impact our community and build your business in meaningful ways. For more information on how the Chamber can partner with you, visit tulsachamber.com. So you just talked about a new album. I was wondering because it's been about 6 years or so since you released Sneaker.
It's been too long.
Then you did the extra EP after Sneaker.
Right.
Had a few extra tracks from that session, I think.
Yeah.
And so now you're back in, huh? Recording.
So now I'm finally back in. Long overdue. Taking some stuff and yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How's that process work for you? Do you go in with a notebook of lyrics and songs, or how do you do that?
Dealing on my budget, that's the way I like to be. I like to be as prepared for the studio as possible. The golden days to where the studio was available and you had this big budget for a record where you could just hang out in the studio and see what happens. I try to eliminate the variables as much as possible, right? Because you're on the clock. You're trying to get something done, and that's really the great thing about the Tulsa musicians here, and why so many of our Tulsa musicians are getting picked up by larger acts to do studio sessions and do tours behind them, is because they're clean, they're quick, they're efficient, and they get it. And that's really what's special about the Tulsa scene, and why some people are being picked over Nashville musicians and stuff like that. Not to brag too much,
right?
But a lot of us, there's quite a few of us, and I'm in and out of that circle. But you get picked up because you get that. And so I tried to have as many things planned out as I possibly could on almost all the records, but then you get in there and then you have to have room for things to go this entire other way. If it just happens, you have to leave room to improvise, because the sound of the studio is ultimately going to play into how the musicians perform the material. And
most often for you, what comes first, the lyrics or the melody?
As a writer, what differentiates me from other writers is the way I do things is I tend to be more of a staff writer, for better or for worse, than say the songwriter that writes in a certain style, and then the next song is going to sound this certain style instead of this certain style and sound a certain style. And I kind of wish I had this consistent thing from song to song, because there's a lot of people that have gotten really popular thing like that. When you talk about a John Moreland tune, you know what you're going to get into. Mm-hmm. You're going to get some straight ahead, some very heartfelt lyrics. You're going to get in some minimalism on the guitar, but it's delivering the story, and it's going to be a great story. Same thing with the John Fulbright tune or something like that. Me, as from both being a musical director and people that someone has had to come up with sound sound stuff. I almost consider myself like a 10 penny alley thing, and I'm thinking about my set, and I'm like, oh well, what does this set need?
Okay. Yeah.
So tunes like Western Trailways was like, well, let's make this tribute to Bob Wills. Let's do this and kick this up and see where this goes. And then I'll be working on some Latin groove, and then that's where Poconos came from, this whole other side of the universe. But it still ended up on the same record, and all these different things. It can be as easy as somebody asking me to explore something in a guitar lesson, and I come up with something for it, and I'm like, oh well, I can turn this into a song. And so it's more like that versus me thinking that I have some specific style that's kind of hemmed in by rules. Really, what hems me, what really defines the form is really the kind of backing band that I'm working with and how they're used to interacting and playing. That usually defines how the band is going to sound. Yeah.
So you've played with a lot of people. I mean, the list, Steve Earle, Jamie Johnson, George Porter Jr., John Densmore of the Doors, Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, Gary Busey,
Yeah, so that's where we get into this whole thing to where it's like I'm coming up with this whole new tune, and it's like nobody knows where it's coming from. Because, George Porter, who was one of the forefathers of funk music again, and then Jamie Johnson, which is straight up, the outlaw country. And so just being through all these different worlds and frame rates, sometimes it's hard to hang on to an identity that way.
But do you enjoy that bouncing around those different genres? And
I do, since I came from that background of Junior Brown and just, listening to these records. And when I was a kid growing up, too, I would have a country record, and then I'd have that Sly and the Family Stone record. Mm-hmm. And then I had Stephen Wolf's The Second, and then I had the Star Wars soundtrack, the orchestral theme soundtrack. And I put on, it'd be Star Wars.
Yeah.
So it kind of plays along with this thing that's been going on for forever. So with me, So since I was a little tiny kid, so yeah, So there's pluses and minuses to being this hyper eclectic kind of thing. I got invited to sit in to do a jazz brunch with the duet guys and things like that, and with some musicians, a duet, and some people that came out and they just had no idea that I was playing. I was playing over jazz changes or anything like that. Which that's something that I do all the time at my house.
Yeah.
But rarely do you see it in public, and all kinds of things like that.
You've also appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. What was that experience like?
That was a quick flash of light. Me and Patrick Ryan, we were backing up the Secret Sisters. And I had kind of replaced Jesse Aycock as the Secret Sisters touring guitarist because Jesse had done that gig for a little while, and then he got picked up by the Hardworking Americans. So he was touring really steady with them, and I happened to own the same lap steel as Jesse. So I was able to learn like some of the things Jesse was doing with the Sisters tunes. And oddly enough, on that Tonight Show, they picked a tune that I played lap steel on. So even though you don't see it at shows with me so many lives, the Tonight Show performance was me on taking the lap steel on a plane, and that's the only thing I played. I didn't actually play guitar on it. So again, this eclectic kind of thing.
Right.
And Cracker Barrel had sponsored their tour, and it was Cracker Barrel that sponsored the trip to go down and do the Tonight Show. And so we were in between tour legs at the time. So me and Patrick were here in Tulsa, and they paid for the flight down there the day before. We had one day on Times Square, one day to cut the show, and then the very next day they flew us back. So it was this quick flash of light that I learned so many things from. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my most favorite stories to tell is everybody likes to talk about the picture I got with Questlove. Me and Patrick both got our pictures out there because Questlove was hanging out in the hallway. Well, the NBC studios, one thing you don't realize is how small of a studio that Tonight Show recording thing is. If you actually get on the stage, from the camera, it looks like the distance from the Roots to Jimmy is really a long way off. When it's really in a small stage, I can actually reach out and touch Jimmy's desk and reach out, and, from the other side of the stage 10 foot later and maybe grab the Roots stage. So it's a very tiny spot. And everybody had these tiny, dressing rooms, which they've since put on the show as like, songs from the dressing room. They did that with Madonna and things. And it shows you kind of just how this small little shotgun of a dressing room was. So after taking the picture with Questlove, walking down the hallway, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the Roots guitar player, and he's sitting in a chair with a guitar just inside his dressing room. And they had just finished playing the end theme show. And I talked to him. I said, "Hey, man, I really appreciate everything you do on this show. And you're always nailing every part, no matter what style of music it is. You're playing rock parts, you're playing country lines, whatever." And he's like, "Man, I really appreciate it." I'm like, "What's going on?" He goes, "Oh, man, well, I'm just working on the new Roots record here. Hey, come on in." And they had built a studio in their little tiny dressing room, a full-fledged studio. And he had just finished the Tonight Show song, walked back and started cutting tracks on the new Roots record. And that's how hard you have to work in the music business. That was my takeaway. That's how much hustle you have to do.
No joke.
Just one after the other. Yeah.
With all of this success you found in Tulsa and playing with all these people and touring everything, does it make it easier for you to keep your base here in Tulsa? Or do you ever consider like moving to a Nashville or an Austin or an LA?
What keeps me here in Tulsa is low cost of living. There's the first thing. Musicians in Austin are having a hard time. Musicians in Nashville now are having a hard time.
Yeah, I bet.
Because they're not getting a lot of royalties from Spotify. Going back to that. So, profit from albums isn't necessarily at an all-time high. And just the cost of living going up from big tech companies moving into Nashville and definitely Austin and those kind of things. They're having a hard time making rent and making those kind of gigs. So Tulsa, for right now, we're seeing where the housing is going right now, and it's becoming difficult on some musicians right now. But the cost of living has always been, low enough that you can manage, and as long as you have contacts, people will pick you up from any city to do any kind of tour and that kind of thing. And here, what I see different from any other city, even within the state or anywhere else, is that musicians from all styles of music, Fire and Little Africa people, the jazz group people, the people playing country bands, the people doing 80s rock covers over on the east side, we all know each other. We're all part of this community. It's cool to hang out, and it's cool to share ideas and get inspiration from each other from that aspect. So that's what makes Tulsa really special. You feel like you're part of history, but you also feel like you're part of creating something new at the same time.
Knowing that you're so diverse in your interest in music and what you can play, now I'm really hoping that someday soon we get like a Steph Simon or First Verse and Paul Benjamin song where we mix and mash the Tulsa sound and hip hop.
I think that's entirely a phone call away,
Well, let's do it.
It's a phone call and some studio time away, really, to get something like that down.
I think that would be really cool to hear.
I think it would be practical. Wouldn't require like a huge budget or anything like that, and we could come together and knock it out as friends.
I was just talking to someone who was opening a music studio in Greenwood, so they're getting really close to opening it. So I foresee down the road us making this happen.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Wow. So how is it going during this pandemic for you? I know that Mercury Lounge is now requiring a vaccine card to get into the place. They did the virtual shows with the tip jar and everything for the last year or so. Like we said, you've been rocking and rolling at Colony this entire time. So how is it going out there in the Tulsa music scene with all that's going on in the world?
In the Tulsa scene, it's going pretty well, and thanks to those kind of pioneering things from Mercury Lounge, who decided to, even when there was a lockdown, still broadcast. When we would play, there'd be like nobody in the club, but you could catch into the stream and tip if you wanted to. Those kind of things have really kept us going on the road. The Red Dirt Relief Fund granting musicians money during the downtime, all the things, the Play Tulsa Music that's actually employing. So we've got people in the community that are aware of our situation, and they're getting together and they're finding out some things that are really helping us out. They're really working on trying to solutions so we can sustain what's going on. So from a Tulsa aspect, yeah, it's really a nice thing, and also, Mercury Lounge too, making sure that the show experience is safe for everybody and everybody feels comfortable. Mm-hmm. That's been another pioneering thing, and we're getting through it.
Yeah.
All the musicians, we're all having to live pretty low, but we know where all the affordable taco trucks are. So, yeah.
We'll play for music.
Exactly. We know where the taco trucks are. We know how.
We'll play for
exactly.
food, is what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We know the little angles we can work and have other side hustles and things like that, be it working in the coffee shop or teaching guitar lessons or things like that we can get our rent covered. And really, the small but mighty community of music followers in this town that really tune into everything and what's going on, they're the ones that are helping us float through this. And that's a big part of the Tulsa is the music fans. Yeah, I know them all on a first name basis. They're not a huge pack of people, but just them just helping out every which way they can. I'm always getting like a Venmo tip or something like that from somebody who's just being really overly generous. And I can't thank the people of Tulsa enough.
And shout out to Brian Horton. I know we've mentioned his name a couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
but his nonprofit record label continues to put out new music. I mean, Winston Church Bus has the album coming out.
Yeah.
There was, Jesse Aycock. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
the list Wink, or not Wink, Bo released a new album recently. And I mean, there's just a whole list. Pilgrim, that's who I was trying to think of. But I mean, there's just this whole list of new music that continues to come out, which is really cool.
Yeah. He works tirelessly at putting new projects out and putting things and really, I don't think he'll ever get all the credit that putting Tulsa on the map. Just how well these records do in European markets too is pretty good. The distributorship that we fostered over there, and I've done several tours in the Netherlands and France, and yeah, and that market's growing out there, and just the kind of, I've always felt like music is Tulsa's biggest natural resource. That's really what we've got. It's no longer about the oil. It's no longer about the manufacturing. It's no longer about, this or that. It's really what's going to attract people to this town is seeing the great music this town has to offer.
So if you're a musician in Austin, Nashville, LA, New York, wherever you are, and if you're listening to this podcast, you now know Tulsa is the place to be for music. And not just because cost of living is low.
Yeah, cost of living is low. It has, Tulsa has its own ins and outs, just like every other town.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. There's definitely its own deck of cards to play. And there's encouraging stuff and discouraging stuff that'll happen to you out here. But there's a really good group of people dedicated to furthering the music out here, and I feel really grateful for them.
Now, do you know what song you're going to share at the end of this podcast with us?
The tune I picked out is going to be "Sneaker." It's the title track from my last album, and it's recently been licensed for a film. So there's a lot of exciting things still going from that material.
Well, that's cool. Well, time has flown. I could sit here and talk to you for hours about music, and I know you've got to get back to teaching other people how to play and get back to recording your own album. So I appreciate you popping in and chatting with me and catching me up on all that's going on and sharing some of your some stories from your past experiences. This has been a pleasure of mine to listen to you talk about this stuff. And like I said, it's been a long time coming to have a chat with you. For 14 years now, I've been listening to you sing and play guitar. So really enjoyed having the conversation with you, and I'm excited to see you on stage again here soon.
Well, I appreciate your support of the music throughout the years. Yeah, you're definitely one of the pack that I talk about. Yeah. So, it's been a pleasure to be on the show.
She got a soul